Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Talking Trees Live. I am your host, Katie Dubow, and we are here Wednesdays at 2:15 p.m. Eastern, talking with arborists from all over the country. We are getting experts to tune in here live to answer your questions. What we do is we take all of your questions and we pick the top ones. And today we are talking storms. We are smack dab in the middle of hurricane season in many parts of the country. And so we have pulled in Matt Betz from Charlotte, North Carolina, to talk to us about hurricane prep for our trees and some post-storm cleanup. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Katie. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here.
Sure.
So if you guys are tuning in, first, Matt, we're here with the audience. We want to engage with you guys, and we want to hear from you. Are you in a hurricane-prone area? I have some friends who live in Florida. My mom has a house in Florida where they have hurricane-proof windows. They used to have hurricane shutters. Now they have hurricane-proof windows, the things that we will come up with. And so please tag your friends who you think might benefit from this conversation, or let us know if you have any questions. So Matt, we picked you because you certainly are knowledgeable, but the North Carolina hockey, my husband's a big hockey fan. Your hockey team is called the Canes. So I think you might know a little bit about hurricanes in North Carolina.
Definitely. Yeah. The hockey team's Carolina Hurricanes over in Raleigh. And, where I'm at, we're in Charlotte, so we're a little bit inland, but we tend to get a lot of the damage kind of associated with the back end of the storm or the side of it. So we may not get a direct hit. It's been a long time since Charlotte's had a direct hit, but we do get a lot of damage. And then just with the scope of our company, we've sent crews out of state. Not last year, but the prior years before that, we've gone down to Florida and Hilton Head, and we'll go all over the place, as you well know. So definitely not a stranger to it.
Well, I love that about Davey. Just a little shout out, because although you guys are all regional and the work that you do is regional, you are a national company and you want to help out each other when there are certain instances. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and thank you for doing that.
Yes,
Jen is saying that, while she's in Kent, Ohio, certainly not a typical place in Hurricane Alley, but the storms this year have seemed a little more dramatic than other years. And so whilst you might be tuning in thinking, oh, I don't live in a hurricane prone area, the tips Matt is going to give us is typically can be applied, right, Matt, to just general storm, summer storms, even if it's not the winds or the rain that a hurricane brings.
Definitely cool. Something to keep an eye out for.
Well, before we jump into it, let's hear about your background. We'd love to go a little bit and learn about our arborists and how you got into arboriculture or arboriculture. I've heard it pronounced two different ways, so I'm going to go with arboriculture.
Yeah, that'll work. Potato. It's all good.
Tell us how you got into arboriculture.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started with Davey Tree in 2007, kind of right out of high school, and worked here through college and bounced around a little bit, but kind of grew up in the industry. My dad's been with Davey for about 35 years or so.
Wow.
So it took us from, Ohio and Northeast Ohio specifically down to Charlotte in the late 90s, and kind of saw what it could do, not only financially working for in this industry, but also the company that Davey is and what they provide with stock ownership and just the employee benefits and really providing security and being able to provide for a family. So that's kind of what led me on this path. Started in the field, working, climbing trees, doing plant health care, and then just as opportunities presented themselves, tried to take advantage of those and kept climbing the ladder. And here we are.
Climbing the tree.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I love that you got to work with your dad, and it's a family operation. And the way you just described Davey makes me want to say, Courtney, why don't you throw a link to the jobs? Because I know Davey's always hiring, depending on what region you're in. And if you like what Matt just said, click the link and see if there's any positions that might suit you or someone that you know who want to be able to have all the things that Matt just said. Well, that's awesome. Let's get into the meat and potatoes about what we're here to talk about. Hurricanes, major storms. We already had someone who said they're from Florida. They just moved there and they're dealing with their first hurricanes ever. Carolina's where you live, Georgia, Texas, wherever, there are many areas in our country that are prone to hurricanes. And I read that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, I think,
Sure.
NOAA, they predicted that this year is going to be an above average forecast, which with that recent climate report, I'm not surprised. I see like the next 30 years, probably each year is going to get worse.
Right.
But they say there could be up to 21 named storms this year, which means 7 to 10 hurricanes, which is the end of the season. So the season runs June 1st to November 30th, if you're not familiar with what hurricane season typically entails. And their prediction says that 3 of the 5 hurricanes could be major, category 3 or higher, with winds above 110 miles an hour. So that's NOAA's prediction. Obviously, we don't know. We're not weather people. Matt's an arborist. So we're here to talk about how to protect your trees. But we want to set it up and talk about that. You can do things in advance of these storms, knowing that, high winds, massive rainstorms may be coming down the pipeline. So that's why we've tapped Matt to talk to us about how to prep trees and clean up after the process. So we asked you for some questions. Let us know if you've got any. Megan says she's down in Texas, 99, hot and humid. What is your weather like in Charlotte today?
About the same, upper 90s, very humid, no rain in the forecast. So it's going to be, next couple of weeks look a little rough, especially for the guys out in the field doing a lot of the labor. Definitely feel for them for sure.
It's been hot here in Pennsylvania too. And I don't know if that's part of the NOAA prediction, but it is a little bit have to do. So we say that we're in a La Nina year. We talked that you're not a weather person. Do you keep your eye though, as an arborist, on the weather and some of these changing type of climate news?
I mean, to an extent. I mean, with La Nina, they talk about, the winters being a little warmer too, which I know, down here last winter certainly wasn't as extreme as it has been in other winters. And then, I guess up towards the north, probably up the northern states and then up into Canada, they say the winters are a little colder. And I know just with staying in touch with people in Ohio, that was, that rang true for the most part. It was colder. They had more snow than in years past. And, we're down here, we had it a little milder. Yeah. And then this summer, it's been very hot, but, we haven't had the 100-degree days. It's been, mid to upper 90s. And, honestly, each year is different. Last year we had a really bad early spring storm season where we had a ton of storms roll through, and they don't seem to be as frequent this year, at least on that front. Obviously, we've had a couple hurricanes that have been off the coast, and that one just pushed up towards New York and Boston area. But even those, they were predicted to be worse than they were, and they didn't turn out to be that bad. So, it's hard to know. It's hard to predict the weather, obviously. And, it's kind of just hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And, when the time comes that we need to be put into action, we're ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's important and I think you'll probably say this and repeat this over and over again, but whether the weather is good or bad, it's important to have a healthy tree. So your healthy tree will be able to withstand whatever gets thrown at it. But let's quickly, so we just posted in the comments what it means to be a La Nina. And it's really interesting to see how weather in the Pacific affects our weather, all across the country. I'd love to know about you weather buffs out there and what you think and what you're seeing as far as storms go, because, we talked about hurricane season beginning June 1st, but every year since 2015, storms have developed before June. And this year, you just mentioned the one that went up the coast. In May, we had Tropical Storm Anna, which was the first of 5 storms that happened May through, I guess 6 would this last storm. I can't remember the name of it, but, it's really interesting. And you just talked about the hurricanes, but why is this? Do you know why this period, June between November, is hurricane season in the first place?
It's just, I mean, the especially the Atlantic Ocean has, it's kind of the warmest time of the year. So that cuts down on wind shear, which can just up the likelihood of severe storms. And the storms that do pop up have more of an opportunity to turn into tropical storms and then hurricanes after that. So I think that's what the majority of it has to do with.
Got it. Wind shear. That's a very technical word. Look at you.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about hurricanes and why they could form. Now let's move on to trees. What we're here to talk about and why people probably follow Davey on Facebook is to hear about trees.
Right.
What is the first thing as homeowners? So we're sitting here, it's hot. We've got a no storm in sight. Are there things that we can be doing today to prepare our trees for a potential, whether, we get a big bad windstorm or a hurricane?
Yeah, definitely. Especially, this year in particular, it's about preparation and being aware of what's going on, because a lot of industries, not just the tree care industry, when you're short on staff, you have, at least here in particular, we've got big backlogs, and we've got clients that we're expected to take care of that have, taken care of us through the good times. And then when there's the bad time hits, they expect us to be there for them. And, if you've got folks that are just noticing things because the weather's forecasting a hurricane or severe storm, this Friday, the likelihood of getting out there to be able to assist is pretty slim.
Yeah.
So it's more about, reaching out to, your local arborist to kind of assess beforehand, or just being aware yourself. And if you have something that you've known was an issue, or it's been really obvious, you need to, quit waiting for tomorrow and go ahead and address it today. That way it doesn't become an extreme issue.
Great point. So number one, and Courtney Bingo, she posted where you can find your local office, because not everyone's in North Carolina or in Charlotte to call Matt. So the first thing is fix your trees, have an arborist come out. And the thing that my local arborist says that I love is that often what you call your arborist about is probably not the issue or the thing that they're going to fix. They get to your property and they're like, yeah, sure. I mean, that tree could be pruned, but you see this broken collar or whatever it is. So that's why you call Davey. It's not just to give your trees a haircut. I got to also shout out, we've got a fan, Ray and Amy Betz, saying how smart Matt is. So there's a familial relation there. Hello to whomever. Is that Ray or Amy? I don't know, but
yeah, who knows?
And Richard tuning in from Florida. So Richard, this is great. This is your area we're talking about. Okay, so number one is call your local arborist now, because when the storm is coming, the likelihood of getting one of those crews out there is pretty slim. They're really busy with other cleanup. Okay, what else can we be doing today? Should we be just inspecting our trees on our own? Should we be out there looking, enjoying the shade on some of these hot days? But is there stuff that we can inspect and look for?
Definitely. Yeah. It's just like, you wouldn't ignore, if you're in your house and you see that a stain's forming on the ceiling, you're not going to ignore it and just hope it goes away. That's likely a water leak or something that shouldn't be there. So it's the same with your trees. If you go outside and you look around and something seems out of place, you want to address it then, instead of waiting for it to become, a broken limb on your house, something to that effect, or landing on a car. If you see something that doesn't seem right, that's the time to, call. And fortunately, with, working with a company like Davey, we're very, people can reach us very easily, through our web lead process, or, sending pictures. And we're not going to ignore somebody. We may not be able to help immediately, but we can at least advise, and then, try to give the best advice we can.
Love that. So you just, we talked about looking and observing. If we've got trees, I feel like one of the big issues during a big storm is power outages. So, we've heard of power outages from Texas this winter of weeks, and to just, a couple of hours, and nobody wants to lose their power. So if a tree is close to the power lines or almost touching, is that something, even though that tree might look like it's in perfect shape, would that be something maybe we should call in advance of a storm?
It can be. I mean, typically that's going to be reaching out to the power company directly and just saying, hey, I've got this tree. Or, on occasion, I'll go look at trees, but I'll advise the folks, like, this isn't our lane. This isn't something that we can assist with. So, call your local power company, have them come out and assess. And, typically they can prune the trees back far enough to where at least we can approach them at that point and assist, moving forward. But not only, can that save the consumer some money by not having to, have us come out and do the whole project, they can kind of get a little bit of what they're paying for anyway. It makes it safer for us, and then, hopefully reduces the likelihood of, a severe outage due to a limb failure or a limb touching a power line or transformer.
Great point about calling your power company. Is that the same if, let's say, a tree does fall on the power lines during a hurricane and you can see it? You should be calling the power company, not Davey.
Definitely. I mean, especially if it's a storm situation, I think if there's lines down, I would say 911 would probably be the first course of action, just because if you've got live power lines on the ground, you want to make sure that the proper authorities can get out there and kind of cordon everything off. That way somebody doesn't get hurt. And then, calling the power company after that. And typically in those situations, either the power company or the city or the police is going to reach out to whoever they have that can help assist with that. And then, if Davey's in the area, it's typically going to be a company like Davey that can come in and assist with something that high risk and extreme. But it's always priority to stay away from anything down, trees, power lines, limbs, not something that you want to try to handle on your own.
No, agreed. Is there anything we can handle on our own? Let's keep with this pre-storm conversation. I mean, if it's been really dry, would a good watering do something, or mulch or fertilizer or any of those things? I mean, I know those are general practices of good tree care, but are there things that, as just homeowners, before we call in the pros, are there any things that we could be doing, DIY style?
All three of those things are really critical for, overall tree health care. If you have a healthy tree, it's just less likely to have insect infestations and root issues. And it not only does it get you on your property while you're doing those things, so then you may be more observant when something is wrong. It also, it kind of provides a lot of bang for your buck, because a lot of those things are more sweat equity than financial equity going into it. So it's really, fertilization is critical, and that's something where you would call a company like Davey to come out and assist with that, to kind of ensure that it's done right the first time, instead of, having somebody come out and say they're doing something, but in reality, it may not be that beneficial. But then mulch, that's something a homeowner can generally take care of themselves. And then water, it varies based on trees. It can never hurt to water, unless you're in an area where it stays pretty damp. You don't want to oversaturate anything, but especially in the areas that are kind of more prone to hurricane, we also have those drought issues as well. So watering is definitely beneficial.
Great. And we've got a commenter saying Arbor Green. So I know that is your Davey fertilizer, which is incredible. I have a grove of fruit trees on my property that my arbor said, you really should use Arbor Green on these. And you would not believe the enormous difference. I bet you actually would, Matt. But, you guys out there, fertilizer, our trees are in these suburban or urban environments where the soil that they're growing in is not like that rich soil from the forest. And so they really need our help. And Davey can give it directly to where the tree needs it, so it's not running off and you're wasting your time or energy. Certainly, as homeowners, we can do our own fertilizer, but I suggest calling in the pros for that kind of thing to make sure that you save your money and, do the right thing for the environment.
Yeah, Arbor Green's definitely good value for what you're trying to accomplish. There are, DIY fertilizer kits out there, and they just, especially on more mature trees, you're not really going to see the difference, where if you fertilize with Arbor Green, it's pretty much guaranteed you're going to see the results, whether that's, new growth or just wounds healing over quicker. It's been proven that, trees that are properly fertilized have longer intervals between pruning cycles, especially with some of the trees that we have down here in the South that need pretty routine maintenance. So it's definitely good value, and it just, it helps strengthen the foundation of the tree. So if you've got, just like a house, you've got a solid foundation, you should be able to withstand a whole lot more.
Because I've learned so much from doing these chats with you guys, these live chats, that I used to think that a tree's roots went really deep. And so I've learned, and maybe out there I'm preaching to the choir, but they really are more in the top couple feet of soil. And so it's important, and listen, they are strong, and those tree roots, they should be strong. That's what keeps your tree upright. But to keep them healthy, because that's what's going to keep your tree, for the most part. Listen, any major storm that comes through, if the wind is strong enough, it's going to pull over a tree. But you want to do all you can to keep it healthy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the roots are typically in the upper 18 inches or so of soil. So, that's not very deep, but they also spread much further than most people, think, where they'll spread, about twice the distance of the width of the canopy. So they've got a lot of holding power, but, that's if roots are compromised, especially if you've had, construction done at your house or a pool put in, and, the landscaper or the contractor is going to say, oh, we can cut these roots. It's not really a big deal. Well, it is. And, unfortunately, sometimes a tree does need to come down when those, if you want your pool, you're not going to change your mind on that. So go ahead and deal with the tree before it becomes a problem in the future. So that's one thing that homeowners can definitely look out for.
We did a whole chat on that. Maybe we can post a link to it that you can watch after this one, about construction impact and, how to maybe work around your tree.
Definitely.
So, all right. Well, we talked about some things that people can do before a storm, what you need to call in the pros for, and maybe some things you can DIY. Let's talk about some specific tree species. So are there, native is such a big buzzword. And I know that one of Davey's priorities is when you talk to customers about putting in new trees, you want to put in native trees. But are there trees, I know this is regional, so it's tough to say, but that are more adapted to withstanding high winds, that maybe their roots go a little deeper, or, they spread a little wider?
I mean, I'd say it's more about in my opinion, about like kind of the flexibility of the wood a lot of times.
Ooh.
And trees, as they develop, they develop different wood fibers kind of on each side of the trunk and the root system too. That's why you'll see, trees in a property that's, the tree could be leaning, 45 degrees. And, I'll tell folks like, yeah, it's a risk, but it's also been leaning its whole life. So it's developed wood fibers to kind of, offset that a bit. So it's the same thing with, newly planted trees. If you've got a tree that, like an elm, that's kind of a little more spongy, I'd say, where it'll bounce back a little quicker. It should be able to hold up, where a tree like down here in particular, we have a lot of maples that their branch unions aren't as strong. So they're typically a little more brittle. So when you have storms roll through, we get a lot of, maple limbs breaking out and maple trees failing from things like that. So it's definitely important to keep an eye on what species you're putting in. And native trees are critical to make sure you're planting the right tree in the right spot, just because a lot of things won't survive more the heat and drought than anything else, but it can also be impacted by, hurricane force winds and extreme storms too.
Yeah. Well, I've heard about pruning, and the way that Davey does it is not just, cutting trees off of the top and giving them a haircut, but really pruning it so the wind can blow more through the tree. Can you talk a little bit about like that pre-storm pruning and how that can really help a tree stay upright?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the canopy of a tree is going to act like kind of the sail of a boat. So if you've got a really dense canopy, whether it's, high winds or not, it can't pass through the canopy of that tree as well. So if you go up and you thin the canopy out, that can allow you have less density. So then the wind can pass through a lot easier, which is going to reduce the likelihood of failure. And it's also, it's going to get airflow through there, which is, just like a stagnant environment. Like if you've ever been in a warehouse or something that's really hot and humid, and then you kind of open up each end of the garage doors and it pulls air through there. It's just things dry out a lot more. You won't have as many disease issues. Insects may not be able to establish life in those trees as well. So all of that can kind of, play a part.
So that sounds like a pretty important part of pre-storm care, because
Definitely.
I don't want my tree to be like a sail, and that's important. Also, like you said, maple limbs, falling, the more that you prune them, it takes the weight off of some of those limbs that might be a little heavy.
Right.
And Davey knows what to do. I had no idea about suckers and how they grew off trees. And I mean, it makes sense, but how they make that limb heavier. And so you guys as arborists know how to preserve that tree to make it grow strong and tall and healthy. Well, tall if you want it to be.
Yeah, definitely. We don't want to just come in and you see so many contractors that, a homeowner wants to see big cuts made. They want to see where their money went. But in essence, that causes more harm than good, because you're putting big wounds on a tree that it didn't really need. Or if you go and you can take lateral limbs off and provide weight reduction and thinning, you're going to get a lot more for your money. But it's also going to, kind of allow the integrity of the tree to hold up longer, which is always the goal.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, it seems like we don't have any questions for pre-storm prep. So let's move on to post-storm and talk about once the storm rolls through. So I grabbed a couple pictures from Davey's website through the years of various damage. So obviously this is some wind damage, and then with the hurricane can come some flooding damage. So let's start with cleanup. We mentioned first and foremost, there's a power line down. You said call 911. It's not a Davey call. Please do not get near it.
Right.
But what if there's no power lines involved and you wake up in the morning to something like this? What should a homeowner do?
Typically stay away from it. I mean, when you've got in particular that picture that you posted, when you've got a limb that has failed and is kind of all mangled on the ground, a lot of homeowners think, okay, I need to get my car out. That's priority one. I've got a little chainsaw. Let me go out and start cutting. And what they don't realize is so much of that wood is under extreme tension, and you can make, one small wrong move and the whole thing can shift. It can snap. It can cause, extreme issues. And that's why we've got to be so tedious when we go out and deal with those issues, so we don't put ourselves in harm's way and, cause damage to us or equipment. So that's kind of priority one. It's just, way to beat. Nothing's more important than your life. So, it doesn't have to be a big rush. Take your time. If you need to call the professionals, call us in so we can assess and kind of put together a game plan.
I like that. And what usually is the game plan? Would it be, obviously each tree is going to be different. So you're looking for cleanup, number one, and safe cleanup. And then what are we looking for on the tree to see if there is any damage? Maybe it's not something that a layman's eye could see, but what are some of the things that you guys are looking for?
I mean, typically you can, if it's a single limb that broke out, that can typically be corrected by, reducing the limb back to a lateral, or removing the limb in its entirety. But if you've got, especially a mature tree where a large section is broken out, that essentially exposed a flaw that was already there that just hadn't been visible before. So now you may see a lot more decay present, to where it's like, okay, this tree is now an obvious hazard. We need to take steps to mitigate any future damage. And that may mean taking the entire tree out.
Mm-hmm. And cabling and bracing is something that could be after a storm, or would that be something that you see before a storm that you would take care of?
That's typically preventative. So it's something that you want to do before. If you've got a tree that's got, unions that have included bark potentially, that's something that you can, install cables, which, a cable is not meant to necessarily keep the tree from failing or keep that limb from breaking. Its purpose is to keep everything in unison and moving together. That way, when there is a storm, it all, kind of swings together instead of being pulled apart at that union. But that's definitely something that typically needs to be done before there's an extreme event, because, if a crack has already started to occur, the risk of, if you put a cable in after the fact, it may provide support, but that structural failure is already there. And that could lead to issues that, at least from a company standpoint, we want to protect ourselves as well. So you want to, when I go and look at things, you want to make sure that, if it's going to be a liability issue, you need to be straight with the client and say, listen, it's too far gone. I know you love the tree, but to leave it intact is going to be a risk to you and your family and others that are driving by. So it may be something to, remove at that time, even if it's a hard decision to make.
Mm-hmm. So let me be clear. So when you talk about a union, that's where one branch, is it where a branch comes out of the trunk, where branch has split, all of the above?
Either way. I mean, it can be where a branch comes out of the trunk, or where a branch, laterals off from another limb. So, it isn't typically you're going to put, more cables in to support large unions that are normally associated with the trunk, but certain species of trees will require other limbs to be braced as well.
Okay. And then we've got, we talk about some breaks and how you can deal with those. Proper pruning, cabling, and bracing would be more preventative, but just going and observing and making sure that, the tree is sound and healthy, and the proper cuts too is really important. Not just pruning the tree appropriately, but making that proper cut. So that's something that Davey can do to really make sure that the future, we're trying to set these trees up for the future. Of course, we want them healthy that day, but it's the longevity of the tree.
Right. Definitely.
Talk to me about some kind of like flooding and what you would do if a big storm came through and all of a sudden our trees have been underwater for 24 hours or more. What are some of the things that we need to do post-storm in that case?
I mean, a lot of times if you've had flooding, it's typically going to be associated with winds as well, especially with a hurricane. You may have that storm surge up front that saturates the soil, and then and everything may look fine, after the storm rolls through, but then we may have, high winds follow that flooding, and that's where, trees that are healthy can fail and uproot. Mm-hmm. So, if we've had an excessively wet spring, that may be something to keep an eye on, especially with more mature trees. As you get into more ornamental trees, if, trees like that sit in moist soil for prolonged periods of time, that can lead to, different rot issues just from that moisture buildup, and decay can set in. So, especially if you have a tree that's not accustomed to that, that's something that, may need to be addressed. The tree may need to be moved or removed, to prevent something from happening in the future.
When I learned that tree roots are like people, they need oxygen to survive, it was one of those like duh moments. But so if your tree has been underwater for a prolonged time, that's when you need to get your arborist out there, because Definitely. Like I said, the symptoms might not be obvious. So it might be something that the flooding has come and the roots are rotting, but it's not showing signs above hand. I have a question about that, but let's take Jen's question. If there's a certain time period, so if the flood is there for an hour and then subsides, or 24 hours, is there a certain period of time we should definitely be worried about?
I mean, a couple hours typically isn't going to be a huge issue, in my opinion, especially if it's soil that drains well. That's going to happen. You're going to have that with certain storm. I'd say a lot of those trees that experience that have kind of grown up in that environment, whether they're in a floodplain or in a creek bed, something to that extent. So they've kind of adapted to that. But if you've got areas where the soil's been saturated for, days on end, that's when, extreme measures may have to be taken, especially if the soil's extremely loose, if there's, retaining wall situation or something to that effect, something may need to happen before the tree fails, or, just soil starts to erode and exposes roots. It's just something to be very aware of. And typically a homeowner is going to be more knowledgeable on that front than I am, because it's, their property, or they're used to seeing it. Where, if I look at a tree and say, okay, all these roots are exposed, that's a bad thing, they may say, well, it's been that way for 50 years. And that can change your opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why it's important to get out and observe our trees, what's happening in your landscape. Has that tree been leaning for 20 years, like Matt said earlier, or is it a new lean? So I think that's really important. Jen, I hope that answered your question. What are some other signs? So, this rotting of the root underground must eventually show signs above ground. At that point, maybe it's too late, so you should already call in your arborist. But are yellowing leaves, dieback at the canopy? What are some signs that, maybe a storm has passed through your region where someone's tuning in 2 months ago and they're looking at a tree that has some sparse leaves in the canopy? What are some signs that maybe this tree has suffered from that last storm?
Yeah, sure. All of that can play a part for sure. Certainly with different species, there's trees. A lot of times, at least in our area specifically, it's going to be more drought related than too much water. But you can also have a tree that, and we saw it a lot this year with certain types of evergreens where we had a pretty wet spring and they kind of adapted to all that moisture and they were doing well. And then we had a period where we didn't have rain for 5 or 6 weeks and they started to yellow and brown very quickly. And, it's hard to explain exactly why that would happen with certain trees, but it's just like you and I, if we adapt to a certain way of life for a certain amount of time and then it immediately switches to the polar opposite, it's going to take us a while to get back to that. So it really is, it's about having an arborist come out and assess. And it's not an exact science. There's not a right or wrong answer every time, but typically, we can advise or, make an appointment to come back in the future. Mm-hmm. We can, provide some recommendations as far as fertilization and say, hey, this is going to benefit. And then we'll reassess after that. And if there's other things that need to be done, we can do it at that time.
Yeah, that's so important that every tree species are the same, but growing in your yard, in your climate, in your soil, with your, rainfall and all those things, one tree can be different from one yard to the next. Yeah, and so definitely. I think that's really important. That's why you have an arborist who comes out regularly and cares about your trees, because we know how important trees are. On this, Megan earlier, you, me, we're all looking at 90-degree days today. And I sure could use the shade of a tree and a cool glass of lemonade. That would just make my day. And so we know how important trees are for so many emotional and economic and environmental reasons. And so we want to protect them. And definitely. We thank you for your expertise today.
Sure.
I have one more question if we've got no more questions from the audience. And it's not really a question, but it's an alert that I want to make sure people know that during big storms, big hurricanes, there sometimes are contractors who are spammers. So they come out and take advantage of the fact that the tree care companies, like Matt said earlier, are extremely busy. You might call Davey and want them, you're a new customer, want them to come out immediately, but they're backlogged with many, many other tasks. And so just beware of some of those spam contractors. I'm sure you have heard about them and seen them. Definitely. And you want to make sure that you guys are calling accredited companies, ISA certified, TCIA Correct. Certified, making sure that your tree care company is licensed during the storm, because you heard Matt say many times during this call how important safety is. Right. And it's not just the safety of Matt and his crews, but your family, people walking under your trees. And so you want to make sure that you are calling in the pros, not just for a storm, but for all kinds of reasons.
Definitely. Yeah. You should never run into a company that's afraid to present their certificate of insurance. If they can't get it to you in an email or present it in paper form within a couple of minutes, it may be too good to be true. And it may be something you need to pass on.
Yeah. Yeah. It can wait. Safety is important.
Definitely.
So, well, we thank you so much for your expertise today. And it's been wonderful chatting with you and having your family tune in. I love seeing, my business is a family business. It's great to have this type of generational, interest in arbor culture. So we'll post the link to the careers one more time in case you want to join the Davey family out there. But Matt, thank you so much for your time today. This was really, really helpful.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll say goodbye to Matt. But before we go, I want to remind you guys that we are back September 8th. So we are going to be right here on Facebook at 2:15 p.m. Eastern with Davey arborist Brian Sieber. And we're talking about fall. I don't know if by September 8th fall will be here or not, because it is looking like it's hot, but can you believe it's almost September? So please come back, RSVP in the link to remind yourself about our fall tree care check, and bring your questions about what it takes to get your trees from fall into winter back into the glorious spring. And in the meantime, have a great, whether your kids are going back to school or you're going back to work, whatever it is, but keep hugging those trees. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.